This story explores themes of intricate deception, psychological suspense, and the unsettling depths of human resilience. Listener discretion is advised. Do you ever wonder what secrets lie buried beneath the polished surface of your own life? Not the trivial ones, but the kind that could unravel your entire existence. The most terrifying lies aren't told by strangers. They're woven by those closest to us, and sometimes, they're the very fabric of our own perceived reality. Imagine waking up one ordinary morning, only to find a single irrefutable piece of evidence that everything you believed about your past, about your family, about yourself, was a meticulously crafted illusion. This is where Emily Hayes found herself. Not in some dimly lit alley, or facing down a masked assailant, but in the quiet, sun-drenched sanctuary of her own home, staring at a faded photograph that simply shouldn't exist. Emily Hayes, at 34, was the epitome of controlled ambition. A senior architect at a prestigious firm in Boston, her life was a meticulously designed blueprint of success. Every line was straight, every angle precise. Her apartment, a minimalist haven overlooking the Charles River, echoed her organized mind. Her relationship with David, a kind and steady software engineer, was built on mutual respect and shared laughter. She had a clear memory of her childhood, a loving upbringing with parents who instilled in her a strong sense of self and an unwavering work ethic. Her past was a solid foundation, a known quantity, or so she believed. The photograph surfaced from a box of old family mementos, unearthed during a rare weekend dedicated to decluttering. It was a small sepia-toned print, curled at the edges, depicting a group of 6 children, no older than 7 or 8, standing in front of a rustic, ivy-covered stone wall. They were dressed in slightly old-fashioned clothes, their faces scrubbed clean, a mix of hesitant smiles and wide-eyed curiosity. Emily recognized her younger self instantly. The gap between her 2 front teeth, the familiar cowlick that always defied her mother's attempts to tame it, the slight tilt of her head. It was undeniably her. But the rest of the image was a jarring discord. She didn't recognize any of the other children, not a single one. And the setting, a sprawling, almost wild garden with that distinctive stone wall, was completely alien. Her childhood had been spent in a suburban home in Connecticut, surrounded by manicured lawns, not ancient stone. Her parents, she remembered vividly, had always been meticulous about documenting every milestone, every playdate, every summer camp. Yet, there was no memory, no story, no other photograph that corresponded to this scene. It was a blank space in her meticulously catalogued past. A cold prickle of unease snaked down her spine. She flipped the photo over, hoping for a date, a name, anything. In shaky, looping script, a single word was written: Oakwood. Below it, a symbol. A complex, almost Celtic knot, intricately woven, yet somehow unsettling. It wasn't just a decorative flourish. It felt purposeful, like a signature. Emily tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a distant cousin's party she'd forgotten, a summer trip her parents hadn't mentioned much. But the feeling of utter foreignness persisted. She pulled out her phone, searching her parents' digital archives, old photo albums, even reaching out to her Aunt Carol, the family historian. Nothing. No mention of an Oakwood. No faces that matched the other children. No memory of herself ever being in such a place. It was as if this fragment of her life belonged to someone else entirely. For days, the photograph became an obsession. It sat on her nightstand, a silent accuser. She showed it to David, feigning a casual curiosity. "Isn't this weird?" she'd asked, watching his reaction closely. David, ever pragmatic, had shrugged. "Probably some old daycare photo, Em. You were a kid, you wouldn't remember everyone." He'd offered a comforting smile, oblivious to the chasm opening beneath her feet. His dismissal, though well-intentioned, only deepened her isolation. She couldn't explain the profound sense of wrongness. The way the image seemed to hum with a forgotten history, she felt compelled to uncover. Then the dreams started. Not nightmares, not exactly. More like fragments of memories, hazy and indistinct, yet disturbingly vivid. A child's laugh echoing down a long dark corridor. The faint smell of antiseptic. A woman's voice, soft but firm, whispering instructions. And always the stone wall from the photograph, looming larger, covered in that same dark, clinging ivy. She'd wake up in a cold sweat, the images dissolving before she could grasp them, leaving behind only a lingering sense of dread. One evening, while working late at the office, Emily found herself scrolling through an obscure online forum dedicated to local history. On a whim, she typed Oakwood into the search bar, adding Connecticut and children's home as keywords purely speculative. To her shock, a single result appeared: an archived newspaper article from the late 1980s, detailing the closure of a private residential facility called Oakwood Haven for Exceptional Children. The article was brief, citing unspecified operational difficulties and concerns for child welfare. What truly made her blood run cold was the small, grainy photo accompanying the text: a partial view of an ivy-covered stone wall, identical to the one in her photograph. Emily's hands trembled as she clicked the link. The article offered no further details, no list of children, no specific allegations. Just a terse announcement and a quote from an anonymous official about the need for discretion. But the connection was undeniable. She had been at Oakwood Haven, a place for exceptional children. The phrase itself felt like a riddle. What made her exceptional? What kind of facility was it? And why had her parents never ever mentioned it? The questions spiraled, each one heavier than the last. Her parents, who had passed away 5 years prior in a car accident, were no longer there to provide answers. The comfortable narrative of her childhood began to fray at the edges, revealing dark, unsettling gaps. She started noticing things: small, almost imperceptible shifts in her environment. A book on her shelf, one she hadn't touched in months, was slightly out of place. Her laptop, which she always shut down, was sometimes in sleep mode when she returned to it. A faint, almost imperceptible click on her phone line during calls. David assured her it was stress, that she was imagining things, but Emily knew deep down that something was profoundly wrong. The sense of being watched became constant. A prickling sensation on the back of her neck when she walked alone at night. A fleeting shadow at the edge of her vision, gone before she could confirm it. She found herself checking locks twice, peering through her blinds before bed. Her logical, architectural mind, once her greatest asset, was now her tormentor, constructing elaborate theories of surveillance and manipulation. One morning, she received an anonymous email. It contained no text, only an attached image. It was a close-up of the Celtic knot symbol from the back of her photograph. But this time it wasn't faded. It was sharp, distinct, almost glowing. And beneath it, a single chilling set of coordinates. Not a full address, just a string of numbers. Emily stared at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a forgotten memory. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And they wanted her to find something. Or perhaps they wanted her to be found. The comfortable blueprint of her life had been utterly destroyed, replaced by a terrifying, unknown landscape, and she was standing at the precipice, about to step into the void. The comfortable blueprint of her life had been utterly destroyed, replaced by a terrifying, unknown landscape, and she was standing at the precipice, about to step into the void. Emily stood amidst the charred remains of what was once her apartment, the acrid smell of smoke clinging to her clothes, her hair, her very soul. The police had come and gone, their faces a mixture of pity and professional indifference. They'd logged it as a gas leak, an unfortunate accident. Despite Emily's frantic insistence about the message, the symbol, the deliberate destruction, they chalked it up to trauma, to a mind reeling from shock. Without a body, without a clear motive beyond a freak accident, there was nothing more they could do. They'd offered her a shelter referral, a number for victim services, and then they'd left, leaving her utterly alone in the ruins of her life. Her phone, her purse, her wallet, all gone, incinerated. All she had was the borrowed jacket from a sympathetic neighbor, the clothes on her back, and the ghost of a cryptic message burned into her memory. Asterisk, the forgotten await. Find the symbol. Asterisk, and that symbol, a stylized A with a broken circle around it, intricate and ancient-looking, yet disturbingly modern, was the only tangible thing left to guide her. It was etched not just in her mind, but on the tattered scrap of paper she'd clutched before the explosion, a miracle it hadn't turned to ash. It was her only anchor in a world that had suddenly become liquid. Where did she even begin? She had no money, no ID, no home. Her parents were gone, her extended family scattered across states, barely in touch. Fear, cold and sharp, began to curdle in her stomach. Someone had done this. Someone wanted her to find something or perhaps be found. And they had ensured she was stripped bare, vulnerable, forced to follow their breadcrumbs. Her mind raced, searching for any port in this sudden storm. A name surfaced, a lifeline she hadn't considered in years. Sarah Miller. Her oldest friend, her college roommate, the one person who, despite her pragmatic nature, might actually listen. Sarah worked as a graphic designer, a woman immersed in symbols and visual language. If anyone could help her decipher this strange emblem, it would be Sarah. With a desperate hope, Emily started walking, the city lights blurring through her tear-filled eyes. She knew Sarah's address, a small apartment above a bustling coffee shop downtown. The walk was long, a blur of neon signs and indifferent faces. Each shadow seemed to lengthen, each distant siren a warning. She felt an unsettling sensation, a prickling awareness that she was being watched, that the eyes that had orchestrated her destruction were still following her every move. When she finally reached Sarah's door, it was late, past midnight. Her knuckles rapped weakly against the wood. A moment of silence, then shuffling footsteps. The door opened a crack, revealing Sarah's sleepy, confused face. Her eyes widened in alarm as she took in Emily's soot-stained face, her disheveled hair, the raw terror in her gaze. "Emily? What happened? My God, you look like you've seen a ghost." Emily stumbled inside, the words tumbling out in a frantic, incoherent rush. She recounted the explosion, the message, the symbol, the police's disbelief. Sarah, always the calm one, poured her a glass of water, made her sit, and listened with a growing look of concern, her initial skepticism slowly giving way to bewildered worry. Okay, slow down," Sarah said gently, her brow furrowed. "Your apartment exploded? And someone left you a note with a weird symbol? Emily, are you sure you're not hallucinating? The trauma, it can do strange things to your mind." "I'm not hallucinating, Sarah. I swear. It was real. The note, the symbol, the fire. They want me to find something. Or someone. And this symbol." Emily pulled out the singed scrap of paper, carefully unfolding it. "This is the only clue I have." Sarah took the paper, her designer's eye immediately scrutinizing the intricate emblem. She traced the lines with her finger, her expression thoughtful. "It's unique. Not quite Celtic, not quite runic. It has an ancient feel, but the execution is almost modern, like a stylized corporate logo, but for something much older. I've never seen anything like it. Can you help me? Please. I have nothing. No ID, no money, no home. I don't know who to trust." Emily's voice cracked, the raw vulnerability in her plea finally breaking through Sarah's cautious reserve. Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Of course I'll help you. You can stay here. We'll figure this out. But this is crazy, Emily. It sounds like something out of a thriller novel." The next morning, armed with coffee and a laptop, they began their search. Sarah, with her expertise in visual recognition and digital archives, spent hours combing through databases, art history sites, occult symbols, ancient scripts. They typed in every descriptor they could think of: ancient A symbol, broken circle emblem, forgotten script. Nothing. The symbol seemed to exist in a vacuum, utterly unique, utterly untraceable. Frustration mounted with each failed search. Emily felt a growing despair. Was this a dead end? Was she meant to chase a ghost? A symbol that didn't exist anywhere but in the mind of her tormentors? The weight of her homelessness, her fear, pressed down on her, threatening to crush her resolve. Then a flicker of memory. A dusty leather-bound journal. A reclusive old man. Her grandfather, Arthur Hayes. He had been an eccentric, a man of peculiar hobbies, always sketching, always reading obscure histories. Emily had spent summers at his remote cabin in the woods, a place filled with strange artifacts and even stranger books. She remembered him, hunched over his desk, drawing intricate patterns, some of them unsettlingly similar to the one now haunting her. He had called them the language of the forgotten. At the time, she dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man fascinated by esoterica. But now, "My grandfather," Emily blurted out, startling Sarah. "Arthur Hayes. He used to draw symbols like this. In a journal. He had a cabin way out in the woods upstate. I inherited it when he passed, but I haven't been there in years." Sarah looked up from the laptop, her eyes wide. "Your grandfather? The one who collected all those weird antiques? You think he was involved in something like this?" "I don't know what to think, Sarah. But he always talked about the forgotten, about hidden histories. He had a journal full of his drawings. What if this symbol was in there? What if he knew something?" Emily's voice was filled with a desperate hope, a fragile thread of possibility in the overwhelming darkness. "It's a long shot," Sarah conceded, "but it's the only lead we have. And if it connects to your grandfather, it might not be a random attack. It might be inherited. But Emily, that cabin is isolated. It's not exactly safe if someone is looking for you." "It's the only place I can think of that might hold answers," Emily insisted, a fierce determination hardening her gaze. "And if they knew about me, if they found my apartment, they might know about the cabin too. But it's a risk I have to take." The decision was made. They borrowed Sarah's beat-up old sedan, packed a few essentials, and set off for the cabin. The drive was long, the paved roads eventually giving way to winding dirt tracks, shrouded by dense ancient trees. The deeper they went, the more the silence of the forest pressed in around them, a heavy, watchful presence. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Arthur Hayes' cabin was even more dilapidated than Emily remembered. Overgrown with ivy, its windows dark and dusty, it looked like a forgotten relic itself, hidden away from the modern world. A shiver ran down Emily's spine. This place, once a childhood sanctuary, now felt like a mausoleum of secrets. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of old paper and dust. Cobwebs draped from the low ceiling, and furniture was covered in white sheets, like ghosts frozen in time. Emily's heart pounded as she moved through the familiar, yet strangely alien rooms. Her grandfather's study, however, remained untouched, a chaotic testament to his lifelong obsession. Bookshelves overflowed with leather-bound tomes, maps were tacked to the walls, and a large wooden desk was buried under stacks of papers, magnifying glasses and strange polished stones. "Okay, where do we even start?" Sarah whispered, her voice hushed by the cabin's oppressive silence. Emily's gaze fell upon a small locked chest tucked away beneath a pile of old atlases. It was a simple wooden box, but she remembered her grandfather always keeping it close, always referring to it as his treasury of truths. She found the small tarnished key hanging on a nail behind a faded photograph of her grandmother. With trembling hands, she unlocked the chest. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed letters and a few antique coins, was the journal. It was thick, bound in dark, worn leather, its pages edged with gold leaf. Emily's fingers brushed over the cover, a wave of both dread and anticipation washing over her. This was it. This was where the answers might lie. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with her grandfather's elegant, if sometimes cramped handwriting. Sketches of strange symbols, ancient architecture, and constellations Emily didn't recognize filled the margins. And there it was on the very first page, drawn with meticulous precision, the stylized "A" with the broken circle, the symbol that had destroyed her life. Beneath it, in her grandfather's distinctive script, were two words: asterisk, the alliance. Asterisk. Emily's breath hitched. "Sarah, look." Sarah leaned closer, her eyes scanning the page. Below the alliance, Arthur had written a series of cryptic entries, dates, locations, and names, some familiar, some completely foreign. Phrases like "the keepers of the veil," "the architects of silence," and "the true forgotten" appeared repeatedly. It wasn't a diary, it was a chronicle, a research log, a coded history of something vast and hidden. He was part of this, wasn't he? Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. He wasn't just an eccentric old man. He knew. He was involved. As she turned the pages, a name jumped out at her, written in bold, underlined letters. Asterisk Michael Thorne. Asterisk below it, a single chilling note. Asterisk the betrayer. Do not trust him. Asterisk. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked upstairs. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, but in the profound silence of the cabin, it was like a gunshot. Emily and Sarah froze, their eyes locking. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She hadn't been wrong. They had been followed. The cabin wasn't a sanctuary. It was a trap. The void wasn't just something she was stepping into. It was already here, inside, surrounding them, and it had a name. It had a face, and it wanted what her grandfather knew. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the terrifying realization that had just slammed into her. Michael, sensing her sudden rigidity, turned, his eyes questioning, then widening as he followed her gaze to the window. The faint shimmer of light, barely discernible against the deepening twilight, wasn't a trick of the eye. It was movement, purposeful. A metallic click, barely audible over the wind, came from the front door. Not a knock. A lockpick. Michael's hand shot out, grabbing Emily's arm, pulling her back into the shadows of the main living area. "Someone's here," he whispered, his voice a low growl of pure adrenaline. "They've been here," Emily corrected, her own voice barely a gasp. "They followed us. This isn't just a cabin, Michael. It's a bait trap." The front door creaked open, just a sliver at first, then wider, revealing the ominous silhouette of a figure. Tall, lean. They moved with an unsettling fluidity, a predatory grace. The air in the cabin grew heavy, thick with a palpable dread that had nothing to do with the chill of the evening. Emily felt a prickle of ice crawl up her spine. This wasn't a random break-in. This was targeted, personal. Another figure, broader and more imposing, stepped inside, then a third. They spread out, moving with practiced ease, their eyes scanning the room, the beam of a tactical flashlight cutting through the gloom. They weren't looking for valuables. They were looking for them. "Emily? Michael?" A voice deep and resonant cut through the silence. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a declaration of their presence, an acknowledgement of their capture. "We know you're here. We've been waiting." Emily pressed herself further into the shadow behind the sturdy, old wooden table, Michael right beside her, his body tense, ready to spring. They were cornered, trapped. The void wasn't just outside. It was here in the room, wearing the faces of these cold, calculating individuals. "Grandfather," Emily breathed, the name a silent prayer, a desperate plea for guidance. What had he gotten himself into? What had he left behind that was so important, so dangerous that it could summon such darkness? The leader, the first figure who had entered, stepped forward, his face still obscured by shadow, but the intent in his posture was clear. He held something in his hand, something small and metallic that glinted faintly. "We're not here to harm you per se," he said, his voice smooth, almost soothing, yet utterly devoid of warmth. "We simply require access to what your grandfather possessed, what he hid." Michael shifted, his weight distributing, preparing for a fight he knew they couldn't win. 3 against 2, and these 3 were clearly professionals. "What are you talking about?" Michael challenged, his voice surprisingly steady. "We don't know anything." A low chuckle emanated from the leader. "Oh, but you do. Or at least you have access to it. The bloodline, you see, is a powerful conduit. A key, if you will." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, thick with menace. "Your grandfather, Elias Thorne, was a man of specific knowledge. Knowledge that has consequences when left unattended. Knowledge that belongs to us." Emily felt a jolt. Elias Thorne. Her grandfather's full name. These people knew him. Not just knew of him, but knew him. Knew what he knew. "Who are you?" Emily demanded, finding her voice, a tremor running through it despite her best efforts. The leader finally stepped into a sliver of moonlight filtering through a grimy window, revealing a face that sent a fresh wave of dread through Emily. Sharp, angular features, eyes like chips of obsidian, and a faint, almost imperceptible scar tracing a line from his temple to his jaw. He wasn't old, perhaps late 40s, but there was an ancient weariness in his gaze, a chilling patience that spoke of centuries, not decades. "We are the custodians," he stated, his voice now devoid of any pretense of politeness. "The keepers of the forgotten, the architects of the unseen. And your grandfather, in his foolish idealism, sought to disrupt the balance we have carefully maintained for generations." He gestured with the metallic object in his hand. It was a small, ornate key, unlike any Emily had ever seen, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to writhe and intertwine. "This is a key, Miss Thorne, but not to a lock you can see." Emily's mind raced. Custodians? Keepers of the forgotten? Architects of the unseen? It sounded like something out of a pulp fiction novel, but the cold reality of the situation, the ominous presence of these people, told her this was no fiction. This was terrifyingly real. "What balance?" Michael pressed, trying to buy time, his eyes darting around, searching for an exit, a weapon, anything. "The balance between what is known and what is unveiled," the leader replied, taking another slow step forward. "Your grandfather believed that certain truths, certain fragments of history, should be brought to light. We believe they should remain obscured. For the good of all. For the preservation of the world as you understand it." He stopped, now only a few feet from their hiding spot. "He called us The Alliance of the Forgotten, a derogatory term we believe, but accurate in its own way. We ensure things are forgotten when necessary. The Alliance of the Forgotten. The name echoed in Emily's head, chilling her to the bone. This was the void. This was the face. This was the entity that had been pursuing her, that had orchestrated her grandfather's death, that now stood before her demanding answers. He left something here, didn't he? The leader continued, almost musing, as if talking to himself. A final act of defiance. A last message, perhaps. Or a hidden artifact. His gaze swept over the cluttered room, lingering for a moment on the bookshelf, then on the worn armchair. We know he spent a great deal of time in this cabin, preparing, hiding. Emily felt a surge of defiance. He wouldn't hide anything here. He knew it wasn't safe. The leader smiled, a thin, humorless twist of his lips. Ah, but he did. Your grandfather was a master of misdirection. He knew we would come. He knew we would search his primary residence, his archives, his known associates. But this place, this was his sanctuary, his final refuge. And sometimes the most obvious hiding places are the most overlooked. One of the other figures, the broader one, stepped towards the fireplace, running a gloved hand over the stone mantelpiece. The third figure moved towards the kitchen, methodically checking cupboards. They weren't just searching. They were dissecting the cabin piece by piece, with an unsettling precision. Michael, seeing their attention diverted, whispered urgently to Emily, "We need to move. Now." But before they could formulate a plan, the leader's eyes snapped back to them, as if he had anticipated their thought. "Don't even think about it. We have this place surrounded. The woods are not your allies tonight." He held up the ornate key again. "This key, Miss Thorne, is unique. It's part of a set, and it's designed to open something that only your grandfather, or someone of his lineage, can truly activate. It's not about a physical lock. It's about a resonance. A connection. A resonance. Connection." Emily remembered her grandfather's rambling notes, the strange symbols, the repeated phrases about the blood and the calling. She had dismissed them as the eccentricities of an aging scholar. Now they sounded like a terrifying prophecy. "What do you want to open?" Emily asked, her voice clearer now, her fear hardening into a desperate resolve. "The repository," the leader answered without hesitation. "The vault of the forgotten. A place he stumbled upon, a place he sought to exploit, and a place that must remain sealed, for the sake of all that is known." He took another step, closing the distance. "We believe he left a clue here. A map. A code. Something that, combined with the other keys, will lead us directly to it." Suddenly, the broad figure by the fireplace let out a grunt of surprise. "Here!" he exclaimed, his voice rough. He had pushed aside a stack of old firewood logs, revealing a loose stone in the hearth. He pried it open, revealing a small dark cavity. Emily's eyes widened. Her grandfather had always loved that fireplace. He spent hours tending to it even in summer. She had never suspected a hidden compartment. The leader's obsidian eyes gleamed with triumph. "Excellent, Marcus. See." He couldn't resist the sentimental attachment. Marcus reached into the cavity and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. It was old, its pages yellowed, its cover worn smooth in places. Emily recognized it instantly. Her grandfather had carried it everywhere, writing in it obsessively. She had always thought it was just a personal diary, filled with his philosophical musings. "Give me that," the leader commanded, his voice sharp with anticipation. Marcus handed him the journal. The leader flipped through the pages rapidly, his expression shifting from anticipation to a flicker of frustration. "Codes. Always with the codes, Elias. Even in death, you delight in making things difficult." He looked up, his gaze fixing on Emily. "But we have a way to make you cooperate, to unlock his final secrets." He took another step, closing the remaining distance between them. Emily could see the scar clearly now, a thin silvery line. It was then that she noticed something else, something she hadn't seen before. Tucked into the journal's worn binding, almost invisible against the dark leather, was a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. As the leader brought the journal closer, his fingers fumbling slightly with the coded pages, Emily saw her opportunity. Her grandfather had always taught her to observe, to notice the smallest details. And this small detail, this tiny piece of paper, felt like a lifeline. "You'll never get anything from me," Emily declared, her voice ringing with a newfound strength, an unexpected burst of courage fueled by the memory of her grandfather and the danger they were in. The leader scoffed. "Everyone has a breaking point, Miss Thorne, especially when the lives of those they care about are at stake." His eyes flickered to Michael, who was still trying to assess their chances. That was it. That was the threat. Not just to her but to Michael. As the leader's attention momentarily shifted to Michael, Emily moved. Not to attack but to distract. She had seen the paper. She knew instinctively that it was important. Her grandfather had placed it there for a reason. With a sudden, desperate lunge, Emily burst from behind the table, not at the leader, but towards the fireplace, towards the now open cavity. It was a feint, a desperate gamble. "Get her!" the leader roared, taken by surprise. Marcus and the third figure moved to intercept. Michael, without hesitation, threw himself at Marcus, tackling him to the ground in a desperate, clumsy struggle. The third figure, though, was faster, moving to cut Emily off. But Emily wasn't going for the cavity. As the leader, momentarily flustered, tightened his grip on the journal, she saw her chance. Her hand shot out, not towards the journal, but towards the ornate key still clutched in his other hand. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal, her touch sending a strange jolt through her. It wasn't a shock, but a resonance, just as he had described. Connection. For a fleeting second, the symbols on the key seemed to glow faintly, almost imperceptibly, against the dim light. She didn't manage to snatch it. The leader, his reflexes honed by years of whatever dark work he did, yanked his hand back, the key still firmly in his grasp. But the brief contact, the unexpected jolt, had rattled him. And in that split second, as his focus was on protecting the key, Emily's other hand, moving with a speed born of pure desperation, darted to the journal. Not to take it, but to retrieve that tiny folded piece of paper. Her fingers closed around it, pulling it free from the binding with a soft rip that was almost lost in the sudden chaos. She didn't even look at it. She just clutched it, a small, fragile beacon of hope, as the third figure finally reached her, a hand clamping down on her arm, pulling her back forcefully. "Let go of her," Michael yelled, struggling against Marcus, who was now pinning him, grunting in pain. The leader, recovering from his surprise, looked at Emily, then at the empty space in the journal's binding. His face contorted with rage. "You little fool! What did you take?" Emily said nothing, her hand clenched tightly around the paper. She felt the sharp pressure of the third figure's grip, the cold reality of her capture. But she had it. Whatever it was, she had it. The leader stepped closer, his eyes burning into hers. "Tell me what you took, girl, or your friend will suffer every consequence of your defiance." He glanced at Michael, who was now pinned, grunting in pain. Emily looked at Michael, then back at the leader, her heart pounding. She was caught, but she had a clue, a secret, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was the very thing her grandfather wanted her to find. The void had a face, and it was demanding answers. But Emily now had a question of her own to ask it, and she had a feeling this tiny piece of paper held the first letter of the answer. The tiny, brittle paper felt like a fragment of a forgotten dream in her hand. It was no larger than her thumbnail, stained with age, and folded precisely in half. Emily carefully unfolded it, her heart thrumming against her ribs like a trapped bird. On one side, barely visible against the faded cream, were 3 letters, the Ark, and on the other, a symbol. It wasn't a letter of any alphabet she recognized. It was a complex, interlocking knot, almost like a stylized infinity sign woven with sharp, angular lines that seemed to point in all directions at once, yet also converge on a single empty center. It pulsed with an alien familiarity, a silent echo from a distant past she couldn't quite grasp. A shiver snaked down Emily's spine, colder than the basement air. This wasn't just a clue, it was a key to what she didn't know. But the weight of it in her palm felt immense, almost dangerous. The void indeed had a face, and it was demanding answers. But Emily now had a question of her own to ask it, and she had a feeling this tiny piece of paper held the first letter of the answer. She stared at the fragment, trying to recall if her grandfather, Arthur, had ever mentioned anything like the Ark, or shown her a symbol even remotely similar. His study, a sanctuary of dust and forgotten knowledge, flashed in her mind. He had shelves dedicated to everything from ancient Sumerian texts to obscure cryptographic journals. He often joked that he was a collector of the world's forgotten whispers, and now it seemed one of those whispers had found its way to her. Emily carefully placed the paper in a small, velvet pouch she usually kept for sentimental trinkets, then hurried upstairs, her mind racing. The basement, once a place of mundane storage, now felt charged with a lingering presence, a silent witness to a truth she was only just beginning to uncover. Back in the quiet solitude of her living room, she pulled out her laptop. The arc was too vague for any meaningful search, but the symbol, the interlocking knot, the stylized compass rose of forgotten pathways. She started sketching it, trying to capture its intricate details, then began an online image search, describing it in various ways: ancient knot symbol, interlocking geometric patterns, forgotten compass rose. Pages of irrelevant results scrolled by: Celtic knots, tribal tattoos, corporate logos. Nothing matched the unique, unsettling complexity of the symbol on her paper. Frustration began to prick at her, a sharp counterpoint to the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. This wasn't going to be easy. Her grandfather, she knew, had never dealt in easy answers. He reveled in the hunt, the meticulous unraveling of threads. She needed to think like him. Where would he have kept information about something so obscure? The answer was obvious: his study. The scent of aged paper and pipe tobacco, even after months, still clung to the air in Arthur's study. Bookshelves lined every wall, reaching to the ceiling, overflowing with volumes of every size and vintage. Emily had spent countless hours in this room as a child, listening to her grandfather spin tales from the dusty tomes, little realizing he was seeding her mind with the very tools she might one day need. Now the room felt less like a comfort and more like a challenge. She began her search methodically. Arthur had organized his vast library into categories, though his system was uniquely his own. Emily focused on the sections he'd labeled obscure histories, mythological divergences, and unconventional linguistics. The task was daunting. Each book held its own secrets, its own stories. She pulled down heavy leather-bound volumes, flipping through brittle pages, scanning for anything that resembled the arc or the cryptic symbol. Hours bled into each other. Sunlight faded, and the room was bathed in the warm glow of a single desk lamp. Her fingers grew smudged with ink and dust. She found references to forgotten civilizations, lost languages, secret societies, but nothing that clicked, nothing that resonated with the chilling significance of the paper in her pouch. The silence of the house pressed in on her, amplifying every rustle of a page, every creak of the old floorboards. Was it just her imagination, or did the shadows in the corners of the room seem deeper, more watchful than usual? Just as despair began to set in, a thin, unassuming volume, tucked away behind a larger tome on ancient Roman law, caught her eye. Its spine was faded, the title barely legible. Echoes of the Interregnum. It wasn't in any of her grandfather's usual categories. She pulled it out. It was a collection of fragmented essays, theories on historical gaps, and what its reclusive author called the deliberate eradication of certain truths. She opened it, and on the very first page, a small hand-drawn sketch was nestled in the margin. It was the symbol, the interlocking knot, the stylized compass rose, rendered with a delicate precision that mirrored the one on her paper. Beneath it, in faded ink, was a single cryptic note in her grandfather's familiar cursive. Asterisk, the Arcadian enigma. A truth too large to be forgotten, too dangerous to be remembered. Asterisk. Emily's breath hitched. The Arcadian enigma. That was it. That was the completion of the arc. The title itself, Echoes of the Interregnum, suddenly made perfect sense. An interregnum was a period of discontinuity, a gap in governance. What if it wasn't just a gap, but a deliberate erasure? Her eyes scanned the text, searching for more. The book was dense, filled with academic jargon and philosophical musings, but the symbol appeared again and again, usually accompanied by references to a shadow council, keepers of the forgotten, and a great silence that descended upon history at specific, pivotal moments. The author theorized about a hidden network, an alliance of individuals who worked across centuries, not to control, but to safeguard certain knowledge, or perhaps, to prevent its rediscovery. Her grandfather's note had mentioned the Arcadian enigma. Could the alliance itself be the forgotten? The pieces were beginning to connect, forming a terrifying, exhilarating mosaic. But she was only seeing the edges. She needed someone who understood this kind of esoteric history, someone who could help her decipher the deeper meaning of these fragments. Suddenly, a name surfaced from the depths of her memory: Dr. Elias Thorne, a retired professor of ancient studies, a close friend of her grandfather, and a man whose mind was as labyrinthine as Arthur's library. He lived a quiet life in a small coastal town in Maine, a place Arthur had often visited, claiming Elias was the only other person alive who truly appreciated a good historical rabbit hole. She found his number in her grandfather's old address book, a leather-bound volume filled with faded entries. Her finger hovered over the dial button. This was a step into the unknown, a confirmation that her grandfather's death was more than an accident. She took a deep breath and dialed. It went straight to voicemail. "You've reached Elias. Please leave a message if you dare to disturb my peaceful solitude." His voice was gravelly, tinged with a dry wit. Emily left a concise message explaining her name, her relation to Arthur, and the urgent nature of her call, hinting at a discovery related to the Arcadian enigma and a particular symbol. She knew that last part would get his attention. As she hung up, a sudden disquieting thought struck her. She had been so engrossed in her search, so focused on the pages before her, that she hadn't noticed the subtle shift in the room. The window, which she distinctly remembered closing and locking earlier, was now ever so slightly ajar. Just a fraction of an inch, enough to let in a faint, cool draft. But it was enough. A prickle of fear, cold and sharp, crawled up her neck. She hadn't left it open. She was meticulous about security. Someone had been here. Someone new. The void wasn't just demanding answers. It was actively hunting for them. And now it knew she was on its trail. Just then her phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. It contained only a single word: found. Before she could even process the chilling implication, her phone rang again. It was Dr. Elias Thorne. His voice, now devoid of its earlier dry humor, was hushed, urgent. "Emily, you mentioned the Arcadian enigma and a symbol. Tell me everything. And do not, under any circumstances, speak of this to anyone else. You have no idea what you've just stumbled into." Emily's breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. David's voice, usually a comforting presence, was now a chilling pronouncement of an unknown threat. The casual banter that had defined their friendship for years evaporated, replaced by an unsettling gravity. She could hear the frantic tap of his fingers against something, perhaps his desk, a nervous rhythm that mirrored her own racing heart. "Emily? Are you there?" he pressed, his voice lower now, almost a whisper, as if the very air around him might be listening. "Tell me. Everything. Start with the symbol." She swallowed hard, her mind scrambling to process the abrupt shift in their reality. "The symbol, it's intricate," she began, her voice barely above a whisper herself. "I first saw it in a digitized copy of an obscure 19th century philosophical text. It was embedded in a diagram, almost like a watermark, but too deliberate to be accidental. Then, I cross-referenced it with some cryptic footnotes in an early 20th century architectural journal. It appeared again, subtly, in the blueprint of a building that was never constructed, or at least never publicly acknowledged." She paused, recalling the hours she'd spent hunched over her laptop, tracing the lines, feeling a strange pull towards its unsettling beauty. "It's a complex geometric design, David, almost like a stylized knot, but with a clear central motif. There's a prominent upward-pointing arrow-like shape, very reminiscent of a Greek capital lambda, but its two diagonal lines extend downwards, intertwining into an infinity loop. And within the empty space of that loop, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, is a faint broken star. It looks ancient yet somehow futuristic, like something designed to convey information across millennia." David let out a sharp, audible intake of breath, a sound that sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "The broken star," he murmured, his voice laced with an emotion Emily couldn't quite place. Recognition, fear, or perhaps both. "Go on, Emily. The Arcadian enigma. What did you find?" "The Arcadian enigma isn't a place, David, or even a specific event," Emily continued, finding a strange strength in the act of recounting her discovery, a desperate need to make sense of it all. "It's a concept, a philosophical framework, really, for understanding a supposed lost era of human civilization. According to these fragmented texts and obscure papers, there was a time when humanity held a different kind of knowledge. Not just scientific or technological, but a deeper understanding of reality, a harmony with natural forces, and even consciousness itself. This knowledge, they claim, was systematically erased or buried after a catastrophic event, though the exact nature of that event is never specified, only hinted at as a great severing. The enigma isn't just what was lost, but how it was lost, and more importantly, who was responsible for ensuring it stayed forgotten. She could hear David pacing now, the rhythmic thud of his shoes on a hard floor. A great severing, he repeated, his voice hollow. And the symbol, you believe it's connected to this lost knowledge? This Arcadian enigma? Absolutely, Emily affirmed, her research instincts kicking in, overriding her initial fear. The text described the symbol as the keystone of memory, a mnemonic device, a map, or perhaps even an activation sequence for unlocking this forgotten understanding. One paper, a heavily redacted government document I stumbled upon in a declassified archive, it was misfiled under architectural anomalies, referred to the symbol as a temporal anchor, claiming it could reveal pathways to unseen currents of history. I thought it was metaphorical, poetic even, a romanticized idea of history repeating itself. It's not metaphorical, Emily, David interjected, his voice tight, strained. None of it is. This isn't some academic curiosity you've unearthed. This is active and dangerous, more dangerous than you can possibly imagine. Emily felt a cold dread seep into her bones. What are you talking about, David? How do you know this? You've never mentioned anything like this before. There was a long silence on the other end, punctuated only by David's ragged breathing. My father, he finally said, his voice barely audible. He was obsessed with this. Not the Arcadian enigma specifically. He called it the Great Silence. He spent decades chasing fragments, whispers, symbols just like the one you described. He believed that certain individuals, perhaps even entire institutions, were actively suppressing this knowledge, ensuring humanity remained compliant, blind. He called them the Wardens of the Veil. Emily's mind reeled. David's father, a quiet, unassuming history professor, had always seemed so grounded, so conventional. Your father? But he passed away years ago, and he never spoke of this to anyone. Not even you, as far as I knew. He didn't, David admitted, a raw edge of pain in his voice. Not directly, but after he died I found his journals. Hundreds of them, filled with cryptic notes, drawings of symbols, historical timelines that diverged wildly from accepted narratives. He was convinced he was close to something, to uncovering a hidden truth that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about our world. He warned of the forgotten ones, individuals who had glimpsed behind the veil and were then systematically erased from history, their contributions, their very existence scrubbed clean. He believed they were part of an alliance, a clandestine network formed out of necessity, to protect and preserve what little remained of the true knowledge. The Alliance of the Forgotten, Emily whispered, the title of her own research project suddenly taking on a chilling literal meaning. A shiver ran down her spine. David, are you telling me this isn't just a conspiracy theory? That your father was right? I don't know what to believe anymore, Emily, David confessed, his voice cracking with a vulnerability she'd never heard from him. For years, I dismissed it as the ramblings of a brilliant but increasingly paranoid mind. But then things started happening. Strange coincidences. Unexplained events connected to some of the locations my father had marked in his journals. And when you mentioned the Arcadian enigma, and that symbol, it was like a cold wash. It was one of the key symbols my father had obsessed over, linking it to ancient Mediterranean civilizations and a lost library rumored to hold blueprints for impossible technologies. Impossible technologies? Emily echoed, her mind struggling to keep up with the escalating revelations. What kind of technologies? Ways to harness ambient energy, methods of communication that transcend conventional means, even theories on consciousness manipulation, David explained, his voice gaining a desperate urgency. My father believed this lost knowledge wasn't just philosophical, it was practical. It offered an alternative path for humanity, a path that was deliberately suppressed because it threatened existing power structures. He wrote extensively about a network of hidden conduits, places across the globe where the veil was thin, where the echoes of this forgotten knowledge could still be felt, accessed. Hidden conduits, like the energy signature I detected at that abandoned research facility? Emily gasped, the pieces starting to click into place with terrifying precision. The one with the peculiar resonant frequencies that defied explanation? The one where I found that strange, almost crystalline device that hummed with a low, unnatural energy. David's silence was more eloquent than any words. You found a device? He finally managed, his voice barely a whisper, laced with pure, unadulterated fear. Emily, did you touch it? Did you activate it? I didn't activate it, not intentionally, Emily stammered, recalling the strange warmth that had emanated from the object, the faint flicker of lights she thought she'd imagined. I just studied it. I took readings. It pulsed with a kind of energy I've never seen before, a signature that didn't match anything in known physics. I thought it was some experimental relic, a failed attempt at something cutting edge. That's no failed experiment, Emily, David said, his voice rising in alarm. That's a key, a trigger. My father's journal spoke of resonance devices that could attune to the temporal anchors, your symbol, and potentially unlock the hidden conduits. If you've been working with one, if you've been studying that symbol, you've not only put yourself in unimaginable danger, but you've also alerted them. Alerted who? Emily demanded, her heart hammering against her ribs. The air in her apartment suddenly felt heavy, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The wardens, Emily. The ones who keep the veil in place. The ones who ensure the Arcadian enigma remains an enigma, David replied, his voice strained. They don't want this knowledge resurfacing. They will stop at nothing to keep it buried. And anyone who gets too close, they disappear. Or worse. A sudden sharp crackle of static erupted on the line, distorting David's next words into an unintelligible garble. Emily pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at it in disbelief. The static intensified, a harsh grating sound that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by an unnerving, absolute silence. Not just on the phone line, but in her apartment. The low hum of her refrigerator, the distant city traffic, even the gentle whir of her laptop fan, everything had ceased. The power, she realized, had just flickered. A deep, unsettling darkness permeated the room for a fleeting moment before the lights flickered back on, brighter, harsher than before. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She could feel a cold draft, even though all her windows were closed. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of ozone hung in the air. David, she whispered into the phone, her voice trembling. David, are you there? Only the dead silence of a disconnected line answered her. And then from just outside her apartment door, a soft, almost imperceptible scrape sounded like something being dragged. Or someone. Jessica froze, every muscle in her body locking into place. The sound outside her door wasn't just a scrape anymore. It was a rhythmic, heavy dragging, punctuated by a soft, wet thud. It was getting closer, moving slowly, deliberately, down the hallway towards her apartment. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of fear. David was gone. Michael was dead. Emily was in hiding. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Her eyes darted around the small living room, searching for a weapon, an escape, anything. The heavy oak door, usually a comforting barrier, now felt flimsy, a mere suggestion against whatever monstrosity lurked on the other side. She crept towards it, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her hands, slick with sweat, hovered over the peephole. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide under the nearest surface and pray she was invisible. But another, colder part of her, the part that had worked alongside David, that had seen the quiet injustice in the world, demanded to know, to understand. She pressed her eye to the tiny lens. The hallway outside was dimly lit, the yellow glow from the overhead fixture casting long, distorted shadows. Her breath hitched. Moving slowly, deliberately was a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, draped entirely in a dark, heavy cloak. Its hood was pulled low, obscuring its face, but what it was doing, what it was dragging, was horrifyingly clear. It wasn't an object. It was a person. A man. His unconscious form was being pulled by the ankles, his head lolling unnaturally, leaving a dark, glistening trail on the worn carpet. The man's face was obscured by shadow and what looked like a struggle, but a flash of light caught something familiar. A silver watch on his wrist. It was David's. A choked gasp escaped Jessica's throat, immediately muffled by her hand. David. The man in the cloak was dragging David. And he was coming for her door. The dragging stopped directly in front of her apartment. The cloaked figure paused, its head tilting slightly as if listening. Jessica instinctively recoiled, stumbling backward, her breath ragged. She could hear nothing now but the frantic pounding of her own heart. The silence was more terrifying than the dragging sound. It was the silence of a predator assessing its prey. Then a faint click. A soft metallic whisper at her lock. Someone was trying to get in. Her mind raced. There was no back door, no fire escape from her second-story window. The only way out was through the hallway, past the cloaked figure and David's unconscious form. She had to think, to move now. Her gaze fell on David's backpack, still slung over the chair where he'd left it just hours ago. He'd been so careful with it, always keeping it close. What if there was something in it? A clue? A weapon? It was a desperate hope, but it was all she had. She scrambled towards the backpack, her fingers fumbling with the zipper. The lock clicked again, louder this time, followed by a soft creak as the door frame groaned under pressure. He wasn't trying to pick the lock anymore. He was forcing it. Inside the backpack, nestled amongst David's usual research notes and a half-eaten granola bar, was a small, worn leather-bound journal. It wasn't like David to carry something so old-fashioned. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it out. On the cover, embossed in faded gold, was a single cryptic symbol. An intricate compass rose overlaid with a stylized, almost skeletal hand. The same symbol Michael had described, the one he'd warned them about. The symbol of the Alliance of the Forgotten. A sudden splintering crack echoed through the apartment. The door was giving way. There was no time to read. She shoved the journal into her pocket, her eyes scanning for another option. The kitchen. The window over the sink. It led to a narrow ledge, just wide enough for a person, that ran along the side of the building to the fire escape at the end of the hall. It was risky, terrifying, but it was her only chance. She sprinted to the kitchen, yanking open the window with a desperate heave. Cold night air rushed in, a brief, sharp shock that focused her mind. Below, the concrete alley looked impossibly far. The ledge was slick with dew. Another loud crack. The door burst open with a sickening splinter, wood shrieking as it tore from the frame. Jessica didn't look back. She swung her legs over the sill, her hands gripping the frame, and pushed herself onto the narrow ledge. The wind whipped at her hair, threatening to unbalance her. She pressed herself flat against the brick wall, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She could hear heavy footsteps inside her apartment. The cloaked figure was in. She began to shuffle sideways, inch by agonizing inch, along the ledge. The brick was rough against her palms, her shoes scrabbling for purchase on the damp, mossy surface. She dared not look down. She dared not look back. The kitchen window slammed shut behind her, the sound a gut-wrenching finality. She was outside, exposed, vulnerable. But she was moving. Slowly, painfully, she made her way towards the fire escape. The building seemed to stretch on forever, the distance between her and safety immense. Her muscles burned, her fear a constant, icy companion. Then a new sound. Not from inside her apartment but from above. A faint, almost imperceptible rustling. She froze, pressing herself tighter against the wall, straining to hear. It sounded like someone else was on the roof, or perhaps the ledge above her. Had they anticipated her escape? Was this an ambush? She forced herself to keep moving, her eyes fixed on the rusted metal of the fire escape. Almost there. Just a few more feet. A small rock, dislodged from above, tumbled past her face, narrowly missing her shoulder before clattering harmlessly to the alley below. Jessica flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. Someone was definitely up there, watching her. She reached the fire escape, her fingers closing around the cold, grimy metal railing. Relief, brief and potent, washed over her. She pulled herself onto the platform, her legs shaking, and began her descent. Each step on the metal grating echoed loudly in the night, a stark contrast to her earlier silent crawl. She was a beacon, a target. As she reached the ground floor, she didn't hesitate. She scrambled down the final ladder and burst into the alley, gasping for breath, her lungs burning. She needed to get out of sight, to disappear into the labyrinthine streets of the city. She ran blindly at first, then with purpose, weaving through the narrow alleys, past overflowing dumpsters and graffiti-scarred walls. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to put as much distance as possible between herself and her apartment. Her mind was a jumble of terrifying images. David's unconscious face, the cloaked figure, the symbol on the journal. The journal. She fumbled in her pocket, pulling out the small leather-bound book. She needed to read it, to understand what David had found, what had put them both in such unspeakable danger. She ducked into a small, unlit alcove between two buildings, catching her breath. The adrenaline was starting to recede, leaving her drained and trembling. She opened the journal, her fingers tracing the faded gold symbol on the first page. The handwriting inside was David's, neat and precise, but the content was chilling. It wasn't about forgotten history or suppressed technologies, not directly. It was a series of meticulously compiled notes, names, dates, and locations. A web of connections that stretched across decades, linking seemingly disparate events. Unexplained disappearances of brilliant scientists, sudden corporate bankruptcies, controversial political decisions that seemed to defy logic. And then a name circled repeatedly, underlined in red: Project Chimera. Beneath it, a chilling entry. They don't just erase history, they rewrite it. They don't just silence dissent, they control it. The forgotten are not just those they eliminate, but the very truths they bury. Project Chimera is the ultimate weapon, not of war but of perception, a way to control reality itself. Jessica's blood ran cold. Control reality? What did that even mean? David hadn't been investigating a conspiracy. He'd been investigating something far more insidious, something that twisted the very fabric of truth. Just then, a faint glint of light caught her eye from the street beyond the alley. A car, dark and unmarked, was slowing down. Its headlights were off, but the faint glow of the city reflected off its polished surface. It was moving too slowly, too deliberately for this time of night. It was searching. Her heart leaped into her throat again. They hadn't just found her apartment. They were already sweeping the surrounding area. She was still in immediate danger. She pressed herself further into the shadows, clutching the journal. She had to find help, someone who would believe her. But who? Michael was dead. Emily was in hiding. David was captured. She had no one. Then, a memory surfaced. A name David had mentioned. A contact he trusted implicitly. Someone who operated outside the official channels. A former government analyst known for her deep-seated skepticism and her uncanny ability to uncover hidden truths. A woman named Sarah Miller. David had said she had her own reasons for distrusting the system, her own ghosts. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But with David's life and perhaps her own hanging in the balance, it was the only shot she had. She had to find Sarah Miller. And she had to do it before the Alliance of the Forgotten found her. Suddenly, a distant siren wailed, growing steadily louder. It wasn't the police. It was a low, mournful, almost industrial sound, like a warning horn from a forgotten era. It seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath her feet, a sound that spoke of deep, unseen mechanisms at work. The sound was coming from the direction of the docks, an area of the city she knew David had visited frequently in the last few weeks. As the siren faded, replaced by an unsettling silence, Jessica felt a vibration in her pocket. Her old flip phone. A text message. It was from an unknown number. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The message was brief, just 2 words. "They know." And beneath it, a single grainy image. A picture of her, taken moments ago, pressed against the brick wall of her building, the journal clutched in her hand. The cold dread that seized Jessica was absolute. Her own face stared back at her, a ghostly image, framed by the familiar brick of her building. The journal, a heavy block of secrets, was clutched in her hand in the photo, just as it had been moments ago. They knew. Not only did they know about the journal, but they knew she had it. They knew where she lived. They knew her routine. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every shadow in her apartment stretched into a menacing figure. The ordinary hum of the city outside became a chorus of whispers, 1,000 eyes watching, judging. She pressed herself against the wall, the phone still in her hand, the image a burning brand on her retinas. Who? How? The questions screamed through her mind, each one echoing the terrifying realization that her world, already teetering on the edge of a precipice, had just been shoved over. This wasn't a faceless conspiracy anymore. It was personal. It was a hand reaching out of the darkness, touching her. She forced herself to breathe shallow, ragged gasps. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not now. Not when the stakes were this high. She had to think. The message was brief, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient. They know. And the picture. It wasn't just proof of surveillance. It was a declaration. Promise. Her eyes darted around the small, familiar space of her living room. The worn sofa, the overflowing bookshelf, the half-empty mug of coffee on the table. All of it felt alien, contaminated. She imagined eyes peering through the windows, cameras hidden in the ventilation shafts, microphones tucked into the corners of her ceiling. The notion was absurd, yet utterly convincing in her terror-stricken state. She deleted the message, then cleared her messaging history, an almost automatic response to a threat she couldn't comprehend. But deleting it wouldn't erase the image from her mind, or the chilling certainty that someone somewhere was very much aware of her every move. The journal. It was still in her hand, a tangible weight, the epicenter of her nightmare. This was what they wanted. This was why she was being watched. The names, the dates, the cryptic entries. They weren't just historical curiosities. They were a roadmap to something powerful, something dangerous. And now whoever they were knew she possessed that map. She thought of Michael, David, Emily, her allies, her friends. Were they safe? Had they also received a similar warning? Or was she the primary target, the one who had actually found the journal? The thought sent another jolt of fear through her. She couldn't risk contacting them, not yet. Not until she understood the extent of the threat. If her phone was compromised, if her apartment was bugged, any communication could put them in even greater danger. Her gaze fell upon the small, antique wooden box on her dresser, a gift from her grandmother. It had a simple, sturdy lock, more sentimental than secure. But it was the only place she could think of, a place that felt, for a fleeting moment, less exposed. She hurried over, her movements stiff, mechanical. She opened the box, placed the journal inside, and locked it, the click of the mechanism a hollow sound in the sudden silence of the room. It was a futile gesture, she knew, but it offered a sliver of psychological comfort. She needed to move. Staying here was an invitation, a surrender. But where could she go? A hotel? A friend's place? Both options felt like walking into another trap. The sender of the message clearly had sophisticated surveillance capabilities. A hotel would have cameras, records. A friend's place would put them at risk. She was isolated, cornered. Her mind, usually so sharp and analytical, raced in disjointed fragments. The alliance of the forgotten, the code names, the historical figures, the abandoned facility, it all coalesced into a single terrifying truth. She had stumbled into something far larger and far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. And now they were coming for her. They know. The words replayed in her head. But who were they? The shadowy organization behind the journal? Or someone trying to warn her about them? The grainy quality of the picture, the anonymity of the message, it felt less like a direct threat from an official body and more like a clandestine warning, or perhaps a demonstration of power from a rival faction. She remembered the feeling she'd had, a persistent prickle at the back of her neck, the sense of being watched even before the message arrived. It hadn't been paranoia, it had been real, and now that feeling intensified, pressing in on her from all sides. Her eyes scanned the image again, searching for any detail, any clue she might have missed. The angle was slightly high, suggesting a vantage point from across the street or a higher floor in an adjacent building. The lighting was poor, blurring the background, but there was nothing else, no distinguishing mark, no reflection, no accidental capture of a face or a vehicle. It was just her alone exposed. A sudden thought struck her, a cold, calculated possibility that cut through the fog of fear. What if the message wasn't just a threat but an invitation? Or a test? What if the sender wanted her to react in a certain way? To run? To hide? To contact someone specific? She took another deep breath, forcing herself to focus. The anonymous sender. They knew about the journal. They knew about her. They had the means to photograph her without her knowledge. This wasn't a random act. This was orchestrated. She remembered a line from one of the journal entries, a cryptic note about the watchful eyes of the periphery. At the time, she dismissed it as poetic flourish. Now it seemed chillingly literal. The periphery, the edges, the hidden observers. Her phone buzzed again, startling her. She almost dropped it. A new message. Not from the anonymous sender, but from David. Her heart leaped, then sank. He was reaching out. She couldn't ignore it, but she couldn't respond without caution. She opened it. "Hey, I just found something interesting in those old blueprints. A hidden access tunnel to the lower levels of the facility, not on the main schematics. Looks like it was sealed up decades ago. Could be a back door." Meet me at the coffee shop we talked about in an hour? I don't want to discuss it over text. A back door. A hidden tunnel. David, ever the brilliant amateur hacker and researcher, had found a way in. A way into the heart of the mystery, the abandoned facility that was tied to everything. And he wanted to meet. The timing was horrifyingly coincidental. Or was it? Was David being watched too? Or was this information a deliberate leak meant to draw her out? The anonymous message had been sent moments ago. David's message arrived right after. Could they be connected? Was David being used unknowingly as bait? The danger was palpable, but so was the opportunity. A hidden access tunnel. If they knew about her, if they were watching her, then going to the coffee shop was a risk. But if she didn't go, she'd miss a crucial piece of information. And if the anonymous sender was trying to manipulate her, they might expect her to retreat. Perhaps the most dangerous thing she could do, paradoxically, was to move forward. She looked at the antique wooden box, the journal securely, if temporarily, hidden. She couldn't leave it here. It was too valuable, too dangerous. She needed to take it with her, keep it close, or at least put it somewhere truly safe. Her mind raced through her options. The coffee shop was public, but not always secure. She could go, but she would need to be hypervigilant. She would need to observe, to watch for anything out of place. And she would need to protect the journal. She decided. She would go. Not just for David's information, but because retreating felt like admitting defeat, like letting them win. She would go, but she would be ready. She would wear clothes that blended in, carry a bag that could conceal the journal, and she would watch every face, every shadow. But first, she needed to secure the journal in a way that truly protected it, even if she herself became compromised. She thought of a place, a hidden compartment in her old apartment building from years ago, a place she'd used to hide childhood treasures. It was obscure, known only to her, and likely long forgotten by anyone else. It was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. She grabbed a small, nondescript backpack, then carefully retrieved the journal from the wooden box. The weight of it felt even heavier now, a burden of truth and danger. She slipped it into the backpack, then pulled on a plain hoodie, its hood covering most of her face. She felt like a phantom, trying to disappear into the urban tapestry. As she moved towards the door, her eyes scanned every corner of her apartment one last time, a cold certainty settling in her gut. She was leaving, but she wasn't just leaving her home. She was leaving behind the last vestiges of her normal life. From this moment on, she was operating in the shadows, hunted and hunting. The game had changed, and it had just become infinitely more deadly. The coffee shop. David. The hidden tunnel. It was a lead, a fragile thread in a labyrinth of deceit. But it was a thread she had to pull. And she would do it with the chilling words, "They know," echoing in her ears. A constant reminder of the unseen eyes that followed her every step. Emily didn't waste a moment. The chill of the tunnel still clung to her. But it was the cold dread of "they know" that truly propelled her. She knew she couldn't go back to the library during daylight hours. The risk was too high. Instead, she spent the day meticulously planning, gathering minimal gear, a powerful flashlight, a compact pry bar, and a burner phone. Michael, still reeling from their last encounter, urged caution, but Emily's resolve was ironclad. She had to go back. Alone. To protect him, and because some battles you just had to fight yourself. Under the cloak of a moonless night, she returned to the old library. The air was heavy with unspoken secrets, the building a silent sentinel guarding its hidden maw. This time she didn't just re-enter the tunnel. She descended with a purpose, her flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The passage was longer than she remembered, the air growing colder, damper, with a metallic tang that pricked at her senses. The walls, once smooth, began to show signs of crude excavation, then gave way to roughly hewn rock, suggesting a much older origin beneath the library's foundation. She walked for what felt like an eternity, her footsteps echoing unnervingly in the silence. Then, the tunnel abruptly opened into a larger, circular chamber. This wasn't just a passage, it was a cavern, carved with an almost ritualistic precision, far deeper than she could have imagined. In the center stood a massive circular stone table, its surface etched with symbols Emily couldn't decipher, geometric patterns interwoven with what looked like ancient script. Around it, alcoves were carved into the rock, each containing a single dust-covered wooden chest. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was the heart of it all. Choosing the chest nearest to her, She carefully, slowly pried open its rusty latch. Inside, nestled amongst layers of ancient, brittle cloth, were not gold or jewels, but stacks of meticulously bound ledgers. Their leather covers were cracked with age, the pages yellowed, but the handwriting within remained startlingly clear. Names, dates, figures, but not just numbers, descriptions of investments, acquisitions, strategic placements. And the names, they weren't just common American names. They were names she recognized from history books, from current headlines, from the very fabric of society. Politicians, industrialists, philanthropists whose legacies were built on public trust. Emily pulled out a more recent ledger, its cover less worn. The entries here were even more chilling. Operation Chimera, Project Starlight, the Veritas Initiative. Code names for what? For control? For manipulation? She flipped through pages, her fingers tracing the careful script, her mind racing to connect the dots. The Alliance wasn't just a group. It was a generational hydra, its heads extending into every sector, every corner of influence. They didn't just know things, they orchestrated them. As she delved deeper, a faint hum began to permeate the chamber, a low thrumming sound that vibrated through the stone floor and up into her bones. It wasn't loud enough to be an immediate threat, but it was alien, mechanical, out of place in this ancient space. Her eyes darted around, searching for the source. Behind the central stone table, obscured by a cleverly disguised rock formation, she found it. A narrow, almost invisible slit in the wall, leading into another smaller chamber. This one was shockingly modern. Gleaming server racks hummed with power, their indicator lights blinking a silent, digital symphony. Cables snaked across the floor, connecting to a central console. This was their nerve center, their digital vault. On a console desk, amidst a clutter of wires and tools, lay a single plain USB drive. No labels, no markings, just a standard thumb drive. It was too conspicuous, too easy, but Emily knew in her gut that this was a deliberate breadcrumb, or perhaps a desperate attempt by someone inside the Alliance to communicate, or a trap. The humming intensified, morphing into a rhythmic pulse, and then a faint click echoed from the main tunnel entrance. Not the sound of a door opening, but something shifting. Someone was here, or something. Panic flared, cold and sharp. They know. The words screamed in her mind. They weren't just following, they were closing in. She had to make a choice. The ledgers were invaluable but bulky. The USB drive, if it contained what she suspected, could be the key to unlocking everything. And it was small, easily concealed. With trembling hands, she snatched the USB drive from the desk. Just as her fingers closed around it, a low guttural growl rippled through the chamber. It wasn't human. It was something large, something predatory. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the ancient chamber. Nothing. But the growling persisted, closer now, accompanied by the distinct sound of heavy breathing, a rasping intake of air that sent a shiver down her spine. The air grew heavy, thick with an almost palpable sense of malice. She backed away from the console, her eyes wide, searching for an escape route. The main tunnel entrance shimmered in her peripheral vision, a darker shadow against the already deep blackness. And then from that darkness a figure emerged. It wasn't human. It was tall, almost 7 feet, cloaked in something dark and formless, its silhouette barely discernible against the deeper shadows. But what truly froze Emily's blood was the eyes. 2 pinpricks of glowing, malevolent red, fixed directly on her. They burned with an unnatural intensity, devoid of any humanity. This wasn't a guard. This wasn't a member of the Alliance. This was something else entirely. Something ancient, something primal, guarding this forgotten sanctum. The growling intensified, a low rumble that vibrated through the very stone, threatening to shatter her resolve. Emily scrambled backwards, the USB drive clutched tightly in her hand. The creature took a step forward, its movement silent, fluid, predatory. The red eyes seemed to expand, filling her vision, pulling her into their terrifying depths. She felt a cold, unseen force pressing down on her, a chilling paralysis that threatened to root her to the spot. This was the true guardian of the Alliance of the Forgotten, a monstrous sentinel, older than time, protecting secrets that were never meant to see the light of day. And it was coming for her. She had to run. She had to escape. But the creature was between her and the tunnel exit. There was another way, a small fissure in the rock wall she'd noticed earlier, half hidden by shadow. A desperate gamble. With a surge of adrenaline, Emily lunged, not towards the main tunnel, but towards the narrow fissure. The creature roared, a sound that tore through the air, echoing off the cavern walls, a primal scream of fury. She felt a searing pain as something sharp grazed her arm, a claw, a projection. She didn't know, she didn't care. She squeezed through the opening, scraping her skin, tearing her clothes, the creature's frustrated roars thundering behind her. She tumbled into another section of the ancient tunnels, narrower, darker, twisting like a serpent's coil. She didn't know where it led, but it was away from that thing. The USB drive was still in her hand, a burning ember of hope and danger. The creature's roars faded slightly, but the chilling presence of its pursuit still felt impossibly close. She could hear its heavy, rhythmic thudding footsteps now, gaining on her. Emily ran blindly, fueled by sheer terror. The red eyes and guttural growl burned into her memory. She was in a part of the forgotten world, hunted by something inexplicable, holding the key to a conspiracy that transcended human understanding. The tunnel twisted, turned, and then, without warning, she saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. Not the artificial glow of her flashlight, but a natural, almost ethereal luminescence. Hope surged, but it was quickly overshadowed by the chilling realization that she was still being pursued. The thudding footsteps were closer now, the growl sharper. She burst through the final stretch of the tunnel, gasping for breath, tumbling out into a vast underground cavern. This wasn't just a cavern. It was a subterranean lake, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly phosphorescent glow. Ancient, gnarled trees, their roots reaching deep into the earth, lined the shore, their leaves glowing with the same eerie light. And in the center of the lake, rising majestically from the luminous waters, was an island. On that island, silhouetted against the glowing backdrop, stood a towering structure, an ancient temple unlike anything she had ever seen. Its architecture was alien, intricate, pulsing with the same faint, internal light. But before she could fully comprehend the impossible sight, a new sound cut through the air. Not the creature's growl, but a sharp metallic clang, followed by the distinct click of a safety being disengaged. From the shadows of the ancient trees lining the lake, figures emerged. Not one but several. Human figures, dressed in dark, tactical gear, their faces obscured by balaclavas, and each one held a suppressed weapon, pointed directly at her. The Alliance knew, and now they had her cornered. The USB drive felt like a ticking time bomb in her hand, and the glowing alien temple in the middle of the subterranean lake seemed to mock her desperate flight. She was trapped, caught between an ancient, monstrous guardian and a modern, heavily armed force. And this time there was no escape. The chilling echo of Elias's men, their boots splashing through the shallow water, vibrated through the very rock beneath Jessica's trembling fingers. She scrambled higher onto the slick, moss-covered ledge, her breath ragged, each gasp burning in her lungs. Below, the subterranean lake shimmered with the unearthly glow of the alien temple, a beacon of impossible beauty and terrifying power. The massive serpentine form of the ancient guardian moved with unsettling grace beneath the surface, its eyes twin points of emerald light, fixed somewhere beyond her, on the approaching disturbance. She was indeed trapped. The sheer rock face behind her offered no further ascent, only a perilous drop into unseen depths. To her left, the lake, vast and dark, held the creature. To her right, the narrow passage leading back to the caverns, now filled with the advancing silhouettes of Elias's armed team. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and the metallic tang of fear. Then a voice, calm and cutting, sliced through the oppressive silence. "Jessica, such a predictable flight path. Did you truly think you could escape the inevitable?" Elias emerged from the shadows, his tactical gear blending seamlessly with the gloom, his face a mask of grim determination. Behind him, 3 heavily armed men fanned out, their rifles leveled, flashlights cutting through the cave's natural luminescence, pinning Jessica in their harsh beams. She squinted, her eyes watering from the sudden glare, but she could see the cold satisfaction in Elias's gaze. "What do you want, Elias?" she rasped, her voice hoarse. "You have no idea what you're meddling with." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, but I do, Jessica. For years, my organization has pieced together fragments of a forgotten history. Ancient texts, geological anomalies, seismic reports indicating impossible energy signatures. And then you stumbled upon the first piece of the puzzle, the glyphs, the sequence, the activation." He took a step closer, his men holding their positions. You see, we knew of this place. We knew of its potential. But we lacked the key. A human touch, untainted by our own motivations, was required to awaken what lay dormant. You, Jessica, were that key. A curious archaeologist, driven by an innocent thirst for knowledge. You were perfect. A cold dread coiled in her stomach. He hadn't been hunting her for information, not entirely. He had been using her. What have I activated? She whispered, her gaze flicking to the glowing temple. A power source beyond human comprehension, Elias replied, his voice rising with a zealous fervor that sent shivers down her spine. A nexus of energy that can reshape the world. Imagine, Jessica, an unlimited, clean energy source. Or, for those with less noble intentions, a weapon that could level continents. My organization aims for the former, of course. To guide humanity into a new golden age, under our careful stewardship. He extended a hand, a mocking gesture of invitation. Now, I believe you have something that belongs to us. Or rather, something that will belong to us. The true access to the temple's core. You've been inside, haven't you? You touched something, didn't you? Something that resonated with the temple, that now binds you to it. Jessica remembered the pulsating light, the strange sensation of cosmic energy flowing through her when she first touched the central console within the temple. She had felt a connection, a resonance, but she hadn't understood its true significance until now. Elias believed she was a living conduit, a key. I don't have anything, she lied, trying to keep her voice steady, even as her mind raced. How could she possibly escape this? Elias smiled, a predatory glint in his eyes. Don't play coy. We monitored your every move. The energy signature from the temple pulsed around you, grew stronger each time you interacted with it. You are the conduit, Jessica, and we need you to complete the activation sequence. He gestured to one of his men. Mike, secure her. Carefully. We need her intact. Mike, a burly man with a grim expression, began to advance, his rifle still pointed at her. Jessica pressed herself further against the rock, her eyes darting around the cavern, searching, praying for an opening. There was none. Suddenly, a massive ripple disturbed the surface of the lake. The glowing emerald eyes of the guardian creature flared, no longer passive, but filled with a fierce ancient wrath. Its serpentine head, larger than any whale, broke the surface, sending a cascade of water crashing against the shore. A low guttural growl, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality, echoed through the cavern, vibrating in Jessica's bones. Elias's men froze, their rifles swiveling towards the monstrous creature. Mike stumbled back, momentarily forgetting his task. What is that thing? One of the soldiers stammered, his voice laced with fear. Elias, though startled, quickly regained his composure. It's nothing more than an ancient guardian, a biological defense mechanism. It's agitated by our presence, but it's primitive. Focus on Jessica. But the creature seemed to have a different agenda. It wasn't just agitated, it was enraged. Its massive body surged forward, creating a powerful wake that tossed their small inflatable boats like toys. Its head reared back, jaws opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp, bioluminescent teeth. It lunged, not at Jessica, but at the nearest boat occupied by Elias's men. A terrified scream ripped through the air as the Guardian's jaws clamped down on the vessel, crushing it like paper. Water erupted, mingled with splintered metal and the cries of the unfortunate soldiers. Elias shouted orders, his voice strained. Open fire! Suppress it! Keep it away from the temple! A barrage of gunfire erupted, a futile attempt against the creature's immense hide. Bullets pinged off its scales, sparks flying, but the Guardian barely seemed to notice. Its attention was fixed on Elias and his team, not Jessica. A sudden, terrifying realization struck Jessica. The creature wasn't just a monster. It was a protector. It had been dormant, a part of the temple's ancient defense system, and Elias's aggressive approach, his intent to exploit the temple's power, had awakened its true purpose. It was protecting the temple from them, and perhaps by extension, it was protecting her, the one who had inadvertently awakened the temple, from Elias's destructive intentions. It was an alliance of the forgotten, not with the temple's builders, but with its ancient living guardian. This wasn't a random attack. It was a targeted defense. In the chaos, with Elias's men distracted by the rampaging guardian, Jessica saw her chance. But escape wasn't enough. Elias still wanted the temple, and he still wanted her. She had to do something more. She had to sever his access to ensure this power could never fall into his hands. Her gaze fell upon the temple, its central spire pulsing with renewed intensity, almost as if it was reacting to the Guardian's defense, drawing energy from the creature's fury. She remembered the sequence of glyphs, the patterns she had observed within the temple's core, the faint echoes of an ancient language that had whispered in her mind. There was a console, a central control panel inside the temple. If she could reach it, if she could understand the true purpose of the temple's power, perhaps she could activate a failsafe, a shutdown, or even turn its power against Elias. It was a desperate gamble, a suicidal dash into the heart of the unknown, but it was the only way to stop him. The Guardian roared again, its massive tail lashing out, sending another boat crashing into the cavern wall. Elias, his face contorted in frustrated rage, barked orders, trying to coordinate his scattered forces. Forget the creature for a moment. Jessica is escaping. Get to the temple. He had seen her shift, her eyes fixed on the glowing structure. He knew her intent. Jessica took a deep breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She couldn't outrun them, not with her injured leg, but she could outsmart them. The Guardian was her shield, her unwitting ally. As Elias's remaining men struggled against the creature, their attention divided, Jessica made her move. She launched herself off the ledge, not towards the passage, but directly towards the lake. The cold, alien water enveloped her, shocking her senses. She gasped, fighting the urge to panic, and began to swim with all her might, not away from the Guardian but towards the temple. The creature's bulk loomed beside her, a living mountain of ancient power. She could feel the immense pressure of its movements, the currents it generated, but it didn't touch her. It seemed to ignore her, its focus solely on the armed intruders. It was as if she was invisible to it, or perceived as part of the temple it was sworn to protect. She swam with a desperate strength she didn't know she possessed, the glowing temple growing larger with every stroke. Its entrance, a shimmering archway of light, beckoned. The water around her pulsed with the temple's energy, warm now, almost inviting. Behind her, the sounds of battle raged, gunshots, shouts, the terrifying roars of the Guardian. Elias's voice, a furious bellow, pierced through the din. She's going for the temple. Don't let her activate it. Stop her. Jessica reached the temple's base, pulling herself onto a low, glowing platform. The air here was different, charged with an almost palpable energy that hummed against her skin. She didn't look back. She pushed herself forward, driven by a primal need to protect this ancient power from those who would corrupt it. She entered the temple, the shimmering archway closing behind her with a soft, almost inaudible hum. Inside, the chamber glowed with an ethereal light, the intricate glyphs on the walls pulsating in a mesmerizing dance. In the center, the console radiating pure, untamed energy. As she stumbled towards it, her hand outstretched, a shocking vision flooded her mind. Not just images, but a cascade of pure knowledge. The temple wasn't a weapon, nor a mere power source. It was a beacon, a repository of cosmic wisdom, designed to bridge worlds, to share knowledge, to foster understanding across the stars. But it also had a failsafe, a protective protocol that could unleash devastating energy if its true purpose was threatened. And Elias, with his intent to control and weaponize, was threatening it. She understood now. The Alliance of the Forgotten wasn't just a metaphor for the ancient civilization. It was a call to awaken its true purpose, to align with its protective spirit, and to defend its knowledge from those who sought to twist it. Her hand hovered over the console, the glyphs swirling beneath her touch. She knew what she had to do. She had to activate the failsafe, to unleash the temple's protective power. But she didn't know if she would survive what came next. Jessica's fingers, trembling but resolute, pressed down, twisting the central glyph. A guttural groan echoed from the very stone of the temple, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. The swirling patterns beneath her hand erupted, not with light, but with a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through her bones, through the floor, through the entire cavern. The air grew heavy, crackling with an unseen energy, carrying the scent of ozone and ancient dust. A blinding pulse of cerulean light exploded from the console, not outwards but upwards, piercing the cavern's unseen ceiling. It wasn't a destructive flash but a beacon, a signal screaming through time and space. The cultists, caught off guard, recoiled, their chants dying on their lips, replaced by cries of confusion and fear. Elias, however, stood unmoving, his eyes fixed on the ascending light, a look of profound recognition, then dawning horror twisting his features. He knew this. He knew what she had done. The floors began to heave, not violently, but with a deep rhythmic pulsation, as if the temple itself was a colossal heart, now beating with renewed vigor. From the walls, from the very air, spectral forms began to coalesce. They weren't ghosts in the traditional sense, not translucent figures of the dead, but shimmering ethereal constructs of pure energy, shaped like ancient guardians, their forms fluid, their eyes glowing with the same cerulean light. Dozens of them, then hundreds, manifesting silently, filling the space between the cultists and the console, forming an impenetrable barrier. Jessica felt a surge of power course through her, a connection to something vast and ancient, something that had lain dormant for millennia. It was overwhelming, a symphony of forgotten voices whispering through her mind, not words but pure intent. Protect. Preserve. Avenge. The sensation was exhilarating, terrifying, and utterly exhausting. She felt her knees buckle, the sheer magnitude of the energy threatening to consume her. Elias finally moved, his voice a raw roar of fury. Fools! You've awakened them. You've unleashed the very power we sought to control. He gestured wildly towards the shimmering guardians, his face contorted. This is not protection, it is a purge. They will destroy us all indiscriminately. But the guardians made no move towards Jessica. Their cerulean eyes were fixed on the cultists, their ethereal forms radiating an icy ancient malice. One of them, larger than the rest, a towering figure with broad, spectral shoulders, stepped forward, its form solidifying slightly. It raised an arm, and from its fingertips, tendrils of cerulean energy snaked out, not with destructive force, but with a chilling, binding grip. The cultists screamed as the energy tendrils wrapped around them, not burning but freezing, immobilizing, and then dissolving. It wasn't a violent disintegration, but a slow, horrifying unraveling. Their bodies didn't explode or burn. They simply faded. Bit by bit, atom by atom, they were unmade. Their screams cut short as they became nothing more than shimmering dust, carried away on an unseen current of air. The temple was cleansing itself, purging the unwanted. David and Michael watched, horrified but also awestruck. They were untouched by the tendrils, the guardians seemingly recognizing their intent, or perhaps, their lack of malicious connection to Elias's ritual. David scrambled towards Jessica, who was struggling to stay upright, her face pale, sweat beading on her forehead. "Jessica, what did you do?" he shouted over the rising hum. She gasped. "The failsafe. The temple's true protectors. The alliance of the forgotten. They've awakened." Her voice was weak, strained, as if every word cost her immense effort. "They don't destroy. They unmake. They cleanse." Michael, ever the pragmatist, pointed towards Elias. "He's not being unmade. Why not?" Indeed, Elias stood apart, untouched by the cleansing tendrils, though the guardians were slowly but surely approaching him. He was furious but also strangely calm, a sinister glint in his eyes. "Because I am not merely a follower, you naive fools. I have a deeper connection to this power than you can possibly comprehend. This is but a temporary setback." He raised his own hands and a dark, obsidian energy began to coalesce around him, a stark contrast to the cerulean light of the guardians. It was a raw primal force crackling with malevolence. The air grew cold, heavy, and the scent of decay replaced the ozone. Elias was not just resisting. He was fighting back, not against the guardians directly, but against the very essence of the temple's protective power. He was trying to corrupt it, to twist it to his will. The lead guardian, the towering figure, paused, its cerulean eyes narrowing, or what passed for narrowing on an ethereal form. It sensed the defiance, the counterforce. It projected a wave of raw, cleansing energy towards Elias, a silent, powerful push. Elias braced himself, the obsidian energy flaring around him like a shield. The two forces met in a silent, deafening collision. The air shimmered, distorting, as if the very fabric of space was being stretched and torn. The obsidian energy held, a dark, defiant stain against the purity of the cerulean. "You think you can stop me?" Elias bellowed, his voice echoing with unholy power. "This temple chose me. It chose my lineage. My ancestors spoke to these powers long before your so-called alliance was even a whisper. You merely tapped into a fraction of what I command." Jessica, struggling to regain her breath, looked at him with dawning horror. "Your lineage? You're not just a cult leader. You're part of this. You're descended from the original architects, the ones who twisted the temple's purpose." Elias laughed, a chilling, triumphant sound that reverberated through the clashing energies. "Oh, my dear girl, you catch on quickly. My family didn't just stumble upon this temple. We built it. We laid the foundations, yes, but others, the alliance you speak of, they sought to pervert its true potential, to shackle its power. We sought to unleash it, to control it, to reshape the world in our image." His eyes gleamed with manic ambition. "And now, thanks to your unwitting efforts, the full power is almost within my grasp." He pushed forward, the obsidian energy expanding, slowly pushing back the cerulean. The Guardians, though numerous, seemed to be struggling against this unexpected, deeply rooted opposition. They were designed to cleanse, to unmake, but Elias was not an intruder to be purged. He was a cancer within the system, a deep-seated corruption that required a different kind of confrontation. The temple groaned again, this time with a sound of genuine distress. The rhythmic pulsations faltered, the cerulean light flickering. Jessica felt the connection to the ancient power waver, the whispered voices in her mind turning to a cacophony of panicked cries. The failsafe was powerful, but it was being strained, perhaps even overwhelmed, by Elias's deep, ancestral link to the temple's core energies. "He's draining it," Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's trying to reroute the power, to turn the cleansing against us." She pointed to the console, where the cerulean glyphs were now interspersed with tendrils of the dark obsidian energy, slowly encroaching, corroding the ancient patterns. "He's trying to corrupt the failsafe itself." David and Michael exchanged a look of grim understanding. The situation had just escalated from desperate to apocalyptic. They had unleashed a force meant to protect, only to find that their adversary was intimately connected to the very source of that protection, and now sought to turn it into a weapon. Elias, seeing their realization, grinned. "Precisely. The true power of this temple lies not in its guardians, but in its ability to reshape reality itself. And with your little activation, you've simply made it easier for me to seize control of the primary conduit." He lunged forward, not at the Guardians, but directly towards the console, towards Jessica. His intent was clear: to bypass the protectors and secure the source. The lead Guardian intercepted him, its ethereal form momentarily solidifying into a wall of cerulean light. Elias slammed into it, the obsidian energy flaring violently. There was a sickening shriek of opposing forces, a sound that grated on their very souls. The Guardian held, but it visibly strained, its form flickering, distorted by the immense dark power. Jessica knew she had to act, but her body felt weak, her mind reeling from the residual connection to the Alliance. She looked at the console, at the encroaching dark tendrils. If Elias gained full control, the world as they knew it would cease to exist, remade in his twisted image. "We have to stop him from reaching the console," David yelled, pulling out his grappling hook, ready to engage, despite the overwhelming power at play. Michael, surprisingly, was already moving. He saw a weakness, a blind spot. The Guardians were focused on Elias, and Elias was focused on the console. Michael spotted a series of ancient, dislodged stones near the edge of the platform, remnants of a collapsed archway. With a surge of desperation, he began to heave one of the larger stones, a jagged, heavy slab. "Michael, what are you doing?" David cried, seeing his friend's reckless plan. "Diversion," Michael grunted, straining with all his might. "If I can create enough of a disturbance, maybe the Guardians can overwhelm him, or at least buy Jessica time." He swung the heavy stone, its jagged edge catching the light, and hurled it with surprising force towards a structural pillar near Elias. The stone struck with a deafening crack, sending shards of ancient rock exploding outwards, showering the area. For a split second, both Elias and the lead Guardian flinched, their concentration momentarily broken. It was just enough. The other Guardian, sensing the opportunity, surged forward, their cerulean tendrils lashing out, enveloping Elias in a suffocating web of pure energy. Elias roared, a sound of agony and rage, as the cleansing power began to tear at his obsidian shield. But he was resilient, more so than the cultists. He was fighting back, his dark energy pushing against the purity of the Alliance. The console, however, was still vulnerable. The dark tendrils were still spreading. Jessica, seeing her chance, forced herself to her feet. Her hand went back to the console, to the glyphs that were now a battlefield of light and shadow. She had activated the failsafe, but now she had to stabilize it, to prevent Elias from corrupting it entirely. She had to find a way to sever his connection, to truly unleash the Alliance's full untainted power. But how? The whispers in her mind grew frantic, distorted. The choice was clear. Engage the primary circuit, the true heart of the temple, a circuit she had only glimpsed in the ancient texts, a circuit that could either save them all or destroy everything. It was a gamble, a desperate final throw of the dice. She didn't know if she could control it, if her body could even withstand the raw power. But there were no other options left. The fate of the world hung in the balance, and she was the only one who could truly tip the scales. Emily closed her eyes, the ancient glyphs on the stone beneath her resonating with a pulse she felt deep within her bones. It wasn't just power. It was a symphony of forgotten frequencies, a raw, untamed force that threatened to tear her apart even as she reached for it. Her vision exploded into a blinding white, then fractured into a kaleidoscope of swirling energy. She felt the world around her shift, the very air crackling with an invisible intensity. The Alliance's vast underground chamber, normally a bastion of cold, calculated precision, began to hum with an unearthly vibration. The figures of Jonathan Thorne and his inner circle, standing before their central console, recoiled. Their faces, usually composed and arrogant, contorted into expressions of shock and dawning horror. They had anticipated resistance, perhaps even a valiant struggle, but not this. Not the unleashing of something they themselves had only ever sought to control, never to truly wield. Emily let out a guttural cry, not of pain but of release, of pure, unadulterated will. The energy surged through her, an electric current that made every nerve ending sing. Her body, a mere vessel, strained against its confines. Cracks appeared in the polished obsidian floor around her, spiderwebbing outwards as if the very bedrock was rejecting the immense forces at play. "She's overloading the conduits," Jonathan Thorne shrieked, his voice cracking. "Shut it down. All systems, shut it down." But it was too late. The energy wasn't flowing through their conduits. It was flowing from Emily, bypassing their technology, overwhelming their meticulously crafted systems. Panels exploded in showers of sparks across the chamber. Monitors flickered wildly, displaying incomprehensible data streams before dying with a final mournful whine. The massive containment field, designed to harness and direct the ancient power, shimmered erratically, then buckled, throwing off arcs of pure, destructive lightning. Michael, Jessica, and David, still grappling with the last of the Alliance guards, felt the ground tremble violently beneath their feet. The air grew heavy, thick with ozone and the scent of burning electronics. They looked towards Emily, now enveloped in a pulsating aura of iridescent light. Her form was almost indistinct, a silhouette against a supernova of raw power. "Emily!" Michael yelled, his voice barely audible above the cacophony. He knew this was it, the point of no return. Emily didn't hear him. Her consciousness was a maelstrom, navigating a sea of pure energy. She wasn't just using the power, she was becoming it. She saw with a clarity that transcended normal sight the intricate network of the Alliance, not just in this chamber, but across the globe. She saw the hidden servers, the encrypted data streams, the subterranean cables, the satellite uplinks, and she saw the core of their operation. A vast, insidious web of control, designed to subtly manipulate information, finances, and even public perception, slowly eroding free will, replacing it with a carefully curated reality. With a focused intent that burned brighter than any star, Emily channeled the surge. It wasn't an explosion, not a destructive wave in the conventional sense. It was a targeted surgical strike at the very heart of their digital empire. The energy surged outwards from her, not as a physical force, but as a resonant frequency, a counter-signal that pulsed through the Alliance's entire global infrastructure. In data centers across continents, servers crashed simultaneously, encrypted files corrupted, their complex algorithms dissolving into meaningless noise. Secure communication lines went dead. Financial transactions halted, then reversed, unraveling years of careful manipulation. The Alliance's control over the world's information flow began to unravel, not with a bang, but with a silent, catastrophic digital implosion. Jonathan Thorne watched in horror as his life's work, his grand vision of a perfectly ordered, perfectly controlled world disintegrated before his eyes. The central console, once the nexus of his power, now sparked and smoked, its screens dark. "No!" he screamed, lunging forward as if to physically stop the unseen unraveling. "You don't understand what you've done. You've broken the balance. You've unleashed chaos." Emily, her voice now a resonant tremor that seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, replied, "You called it order. We called it a cage." The light around her intensified one last time, then slowly, agonizingly began to recede. The tremor subsided. The crackling energy diminished. Emily swayed, her body shimmering as if struggling to return to solid form. The strain was immense. Her muscles screamed, her head throbbed, and a searing pain shot through her entire being. She had pushed past every limit, every boundary of human endurance. Michael rushed to her side, catching her as she collapsed, her eyes fluttering open, wide and unfocused. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and a thin trickle of blood escaped from her nose. "Emily, are you okay?" he whispered, his voice laced with fear. She managed a weak smile. I think I just broke the internet." Jessica and David joined them, surveying the devastation. The chamber was a wreck. Sparks still flew from shattered consoles. The air was thick with smoke, but the Alliance guards, those who hadn't been knocked unconscious by the initial energy surge, now stood bewildered, their weapons useless, their orders defunct. Their eyes were wide, their faces pale with a fear that went beyond mere defeat. They had witnessed something impossible, something that defied their understanding of the world. Jonathan Thorne, however, was not broken. He stood amidst the wreckage, his face grim, but a dangerous glint still in his eyes. "You may have won this battle, Emily," he snarled, his voice low and venomous, "but you haven't won the war. You have no idea what forces you've truly awakened. The Forgotten, they are not just an organization. They are an idea, and ideas cannot be destroyed by mere power." He moved with unexpected speed, a hidden blade flashing in his hand. But before he could reach Emily, David, his reflexes honed by years of training, intercepted him. A brief, brutal struggle ensued, ending with David disarming Thorne and pinning him against a crumbling console. "Your idea just lost its infrastructure, Thorne," David said, his voice cold. "Now it's just a man with a broken dream." The remaining Alliance members, those who had served Thorne with unwavering loyalty, slowly began to lower their weapons, their faces etched with despair. Their world, their purpose had been shattered. In the days and weeks that followed, the world reeled from the silent global disruption. Financial markets experienced unprecedented volatility, as years of subtle manipulation were undone. News agencies struggled to verify information, as the carefully curated narratives of the Alliance dissolved into a chaotic mix of truth and rumor. Governments scrambled to understand the full extent of the digital blackout, attributing it to a massive, coordinated cyber attack of unknown origin. But beneath the surface, a new kind of freedom began to emerge. The subtle chains had been broken, and for the first time in generations, humanity was truly free to think, to question, to choose, without the invisible hand of the Alliance guiding their every perception. Emily recovered slowly. The raw power had left its mark, not just physically but spiritually. She felt a profound connection to something ancient, something vast, a legacy she now carried. Michael, Jessica, and David stayed by her side, not just as allies, but as a true family forged in the fires of impossible circumstances. They knew the world wouldn't understand what had truly happened, and they were content to keep the secret. The Alliance's network was crippled, but as Thorne had warned, the idea of the Forgotten still lingered, a shadow in the periphery. They knew their work wasn't truly over, that vigilance would be their new way of life. Jonathan Thorne and his inner circle were apprehended, their operations exposed, though the true extent of their influence was carefully downplayed by those in power who feared the panic it would cause. The world needed to believe in a simpler explanation. But Emily, Michael, Jessica, and David knew the truth. They had peered behind the curtain and seen the strings. They chose to disappear from public life, becoming ghosts in the machine, protectors of the fragile new freedom they had helped to secure. Emily, though forever changed, had found a purpose. The raw power she had wielded was not gone. It was dormant, a part of her now, a reminder of the delicate balance between control and chaos. She understood now that true power wasn't about domination, but about responsibility. The The Alliance of the Forgotten had sought to impose order, to eliminate the messy, unpredictable nature of human choice. They believed they were saving humanity from itself, guiding it towards a controlled, efficient future. But Emily and her friends had reminded the world, even if unknowingly, that true progress, true humanity, lay not in rigid control, but in the messy, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying freedom to forge one's own path. The forgotten truths weren't about ancient secrets to be exploited, but about the inherent strength and resilience of the human spirit itself, a spirit that, once awakened, could never truly be chained. And as the sun rose on a world subtly, irrevocably altered, a profound silence settled over the heroes, a silence full of both peace and the quiet understanding that some battles, once fought, leave echoes that ripple through eternity. The forgotten were no longer forgotten, they had become the guardians of a future yet unwritten. This brings us to the end of our story, a tale of hidden powers, ancient secrets, and the enduring fight for freedom in a world teetering on the edge of unseen control. What do you think about the true nature of power? Is it better to be guided, or to stumble freely? The choice, it seems, is now truly ours.